the investment of time, it doesn't take long. It's really going to set you up for success and ensure that you know what your priorities are, that you see the time where you're going to be able to work on those and focus on them. And it just has huge gains to make sure that you're not just busy, but actually productive.
Hello, Profit entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited today because we have a very special guest. Her name is Debbie Rosemont, and Debbie is a productivity consultant. So she helps us really maximize our productivity, maximize our efficiency so that we can bring balance and control into our work and into our lives. And I'm excited about Debbie coming here today because we're going to talk about overwhelm. A lot of you guys have been feeling that overwhelm with industry. I've heard the comments of, I can't find people to delegate to. You give me great delegation advice, but there's nobody to delegate to. And today, Debbie and I are going to talk about managing overwhelm, reducing overwhelm, and some things that you can do to really get that balance back into your life. So please join me in welcoming Debbie Rosemont to our platform. Hey, Debbie, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here and I'm pleased to be your guest.
Well, we're excited for you to be here. But before we begin, I always like to know a little backstory. How did you get into this productivity management and helping entrepreneurs with this?
My corporate career was in human resources. So I worked for a large financial services firm and spent quite a bit of time in human resources and recruiting and training and worked as a generalist. And one of my favorite parts about that work was getting to work with the human side of business, the people, and helping the lines of businesses that I supported maximize those resources. It might sound cliche, but you hear people say our people are our greatest asset. And I think it's true. And human behavior, my degree's in psychology. So human behavior, why it's hard to make behavior change sometimes, all those things were fascinating to me. And really, I wanted to be able to help people make decisions, form habits, establish good organized routines so that they could, get the results they wanted with less struggle. And that's how this came to be.
And what a relevant topic. I think that we are in a place in history where we have never been before, where there are more jobs than there are people, right? And so that old cliche of just delegate, to relieve your burden, that may not necessarily be there. So let's talk about overwhelm. Let's talk about where it starts. How does it happen? And let's define that animal in the room.
Yeah. It's probably the most common thing I hear when someone calls and asks for help or wants to explore working together is that I'm overwhelmed. And as such, I'm not moving anything forward or I feel stuck. So people can be overwhelmed when things feel too big or too much. And so that's typically where, we start to look at how can we break down that overwhelm is if there's too much, is it too many emails in the inbox? Is it too much on our calendar, too many demands on our time? And is there something we can do about that? You mentioned delegation as one option, but even if that's not available or not a good option, all the Asian words. So delegation, elimination. So eliminate what's not critical or what's not a priority where you can. Automation, that's another Asian word. Sometimes there's things in our work, our business that we can automate and that can save time. So I think when we're talking about overwhelm, often it comes from a feeling of or an actuality of too much or too big. So when we can break that down and start to get strategic about, dealing with components or coming up with alternate solutions, we're going to be in a better place.
I love that. And, every level has a new devil, right? And I like to think of overwhelm as being that blessing of getting too much of what you wanted.
Yes.
So it's a good thing in some ways.
Well, and sometimes it can be a signal. So we might be, moving along and doing just fine. And then all of a sudden we feel overwhelmed. So it could be a signal that change is needed. I always talk about, organization, whether it's of stuff or time or the way that we work is a process. It's not an event. So it's not just something where, okay, we're going to get organized and then we never have to think about our systems or our stuff again. We really do when things change. So we want to make sure we're set up to handle the way things are now and the direction we're going, not set up to work in the way that we always have or that served us well in the past. Because I'm sure, many of your clients, they grow. And so when we have to then do things at a different scale, it often demands a different way of working or a different level of organization or time management.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. Every change brings about, an equal and opposite, opportunity, right? That you have to change in. So Debbie, let's talk about managing overwhelm, and let's talk about some of those Asians and how we can reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Yeah. I always encourage people to, when they're feeling overwhelmed, to get really clear on their priorities. So what is most important? And I don't know if your listeners are already familiar with things like the 80-20 principle, Pareto's principle, that says, we typically get about 80% of our results from 20% of our effort, or 20% of what we do matters more than the rest of it. So what are the 20% high value activities that when you focus on them, you get good results? And then we need to look at, all right, those are our priorities. How do we plan our time to make sure that those things get plugged in first and that we protect time to do those higher value activities? And then we can look at, all right, and then how do we stay consistent? How do we produce with confidence and with greater ease to kind of take away some friction? And that's a good way to break down overwhelm. And I just use the term breakdown. When something's feeling like too much or too big, how do we look at it in, stages or hit mile markers? How do we take that big thing and say, all right, well, the very first step, we're going to break it down to a point where it by itself doesn't feel overwhelming. And after that first step, then we are going to do this and then this. So breaking things down and planning them out that way can feel better than sitting in the overwhelm.
Oh yeah, there's a saying, right? How do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? You don't just expect to open your mouth and the entire elephant to go in there, right?
Right.
And it just makes a project so much more measurable or digestible when you can just break it down into smaller components and be able to check those boxes. And pretty soon you're there with that. And so what else can we do to reduce overwhelm?
I think about chunking activity also. So doing things that are like other similar things in our business at the same time. It's more efficient. It's more effective. So an example I give is some people, when they are just working out of their email inbox all day long, they tend to get very reactive to what's coming in, and it's not all equal priority. They're doing email all throughout the day, maybe not getting to the things that they need to do proactively. But if instead they can pick a few times during the day to chunk email, to process email, it's going to be more effective, more efficient, and then they're also going to have times to do other high priority activity. So that's an example of chunking or time blocking. That's another great strategy. If there are things that are priorities, once you've broken that overwhelm away and identified what those priorities are they reflected on the calendar? Do you see when you're going to get them done? That can help us focus and stay on task with those items as well.
I love that. What gets scheduled is what gets done, right? And also earlier you mentioned the Pareto Principle. We're big fans of Pareto Principle here in the Profit First world, where we say that just a few of your projects, a few of the things that you do actually contributes to 80% of your bottom line. Right. And so if you're focusing on that 20% of things that you do, right, or those things that produces 20% of your results, you're really wasting a whole lot of time. So the key is finding the things that really move the needle the most and focusing on that and really growing that part of your business.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah.
And so now that we've talked about chunking and we've talked about, not letting that email box control you, a lot of us have team, right? And in this world where everybody is trying to work smarter, work with less, and do more with less, right? Our teams are starting to feel that sense of overwhelm also, right? How do we help our teams manage that overwhelm?
One of my most popular training topics and consulting topics over the last 2 years, so time of the pandemic, has been maximize your energy to optimize your productivity. And it's the idea that, we really can't manage time in that I can't give you a 25th hour in your day, but we can think about how we manage our energy and our attention. And we can do things to build and leverage our energy and our attention. So when you're talking about team, a manager or a business owner can, help remind their team to take good care of themselves. And it might feel kind of counterintuitive because when we get busy and we feel overwhelmed, what most people do is just try and speed up and work faster and be a little bit more frantic. But it's actually a really good time to take a step back and say, am I doing this the smart way? Am I taking care of myself so I have the energy to make it through the day? Basic things. Am I getting decent night's sleep? Am I hydrating? Am I fueling with food that helps me focus, doesn't cause a blood sugar crash, and therefore I'm distracted? Am I moving during the day? Am I building in breaks and taking breaks? It might feel like with limited resources or, smaller staff that, people need to work through lunch or not take breaks. And that's actually counterproductive because we can only focus and concentrate for periods of time. And when we take breaks, we come back refreshed to get something done more efficiently. So maximizing energy and working on attention are two really good strategies that managers can help remind their teams and their people resources about.
I love that. So really helping your team really understand that importance of self-care, that, it's okay to take that break when you're feeling overwhelmed. It's okay to take that breather. If it helps you come back stronger, take that moment and really prioritizing that mental health in addition to that production, right? Is what we want to do with that. And so let's talk about challenges. Why don't people take that step back to break apart projects, to, schedule in the email checking versus any day? What's the obstacle that stops them from doing it?
For a lot of people, it's perfectionism. They feel like they've got to be on and on 110% all the time. And so, showing any vulnerability or asking for help or, doing what they might feel is less than what somebody expects of them, doesn't work for some people. And some of this comes to culture, team culture, company culture. So again, back to what leaders can do or what managers can do for their team. It's have a culture where it's okay to ask for help. Have a culture where it's expected that you're going to plan out your work before you actually start working so that we make sure we're, spending time on the right things, the most important things, because being busy doesn't equal being productive, right? I mean, we can be frantic in motion all day and not get the most important thing done off of our to-do list. And, was that a productive day? From the outside, it might look like we were productive because we were doing, but it wasn't so smart.
Love it. Now, Debbie, earlier you mentioned you had a background in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And, most of our audience, we do have team, right? We're no longer a party of one. We're scaling entrepreneurs, which is, why we're implementing profit first and we're listening to a scaling station, right? A scaling podcast. One of the things that I hear with business owners, especially when it comes to delegation, because, if you can delegate, right, you can delegate to the right person, it really can release that overwhelm eventually. There's some training that's involved, in the beginning, but once that person's pretty proficient, it's a nice ride for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so what stops people from delegating work?
Control. That's the short answer. That is true for a lot of people. They're worried about giving up control, or they haven't practiced giving up control, or it's just new for them, especially if they went from a company of one to having a team. A couple of false beliefs for people is and maybe you've heard this before too, well, if I want it done right, I better do it myself. So that's one, this belief that only I can do it the way that it needs to be done. And the second is, well, it would take me longer to ask for help or ask somebody else to do it than it would if I just did it myself. And that might be true one time or the first time, but especially for something that somebody could take off of your plate that is done repeatedly, you take the time, invest the time to train them, to delegate effectively. And there's some important steps in there to make sure that it is effective delegation, but you invest the time in that and it pays off, time and time again. So I think if people that have the opportunity and the resources to delegate to can remind themselves that they could delegate degrees of control to begin with, if that's the hang up, see how it goes, and then release more. That might be a way to start.
And, a lot of times, that first try isn't going to go well. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and start as entrepreneurs having that conversation. That first time you delegate, that first employee that you hire, it's going to give you some PTSD.
It could. And I said there's many steps to effective delegation. We have a checklist, an effective delegation checklist. It has 10 steps on it. And that close to last step is to evaluate how it went, provide feedback, and adjust for next time. And, rather than just say, well, that didn't go well. All right, well, why not? And what could be done differently, or what's missing? What was missing from that, where it went in a different direction than you thought that it might.
I love that. So making sure you course correct as you go, and expect it, right? Every situation is a learning experience, not necessarily a win-lose experience, but we win by learning in each experience. So that's definitely important with that. Now, Debbie, as we wrap up and we dropped so many juicy morsels that have been so helpful for us, one of the questions that I like to ask our guests is if you could leave a piece of advice to our viewers, to our listeners, that can be personal, it can be business related. What would that one piece of advice be?
I would suggest having a time and a routine for regular planning. So some businesses will do an annual planning session, budgeting, forecasting, making strategic goals. Some do it quarterly. Really, I think as individuals, we benefit from maybe a 90-day kind of larger set of goals and plans, and then weekly and daily planning for the next day or for the week ahead. And I think, again, the investment of time, it doesn't take long. It's really going to set you up for success and ensure that you know what your priorities are, that you see the time where you're going to be able to work on those and focus on them. And it just has huge gains to make sure that you're not just busy, but actually productive.
I love that. So being in control of your schedule and knowing, just like with your profit, right? We are allocating profit first. We're allocating owner's pay first. We're being intentional about our profit. We need to be intentional about our time, right? We need to be intentional about our time the same way we're intentional about our profit, our owner's pay, and then reserving for the tax man.
Yeah,
so,
well, we've heard that time is money, right? So it is a resource, and it's limited. Mm-hmm.
It makes more profit, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you use your time, right? Because we're all given 24 hours in a day, the same resources, but some people just accomplish more, right? Because they manage that time. Debbie, it has been amazing hanging with you this afternoon. For our viewers and listeners that would love to contact you, love to learn more about how to get organized with their time, with their productivity to really reduce this overwhelm, how do we get in contact with you to work with you?
Yeah, the best way to just explore, and there's some great resources on there too, is my website, and that's www.itssimplyplaced.com. And on the website, pretty prominently in the middle, there is an opportunity to click to book a discovery call. I love having conversations with people to learn about what their challenges are, and then to see if it does make sense to work together. We do group training, we do individual consulting and private coaching, and then we have a group membership program. So a few different ways to engage.
Thank you, Debbie, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.